Hello my friends, I trust that you are well and I welcome you to this video presentation. This will be part one of a two-part presentation where I will be exploring a psychological concept known as the negative feedback loop. The negative feedback loop is a concept that encapsulates what it means to be psychologically conditioned to repeat the same events and experiences that result in negative consequences over and over again, where there is a feedback correlation between negativity within and negativity without. The negative feedback loop is a detrimental cycle that results in a downward spiral of negative thoughts, emotions, actions, and consequences, whereby each time that you re-experience the same negative event, that experience becomes more intense and damaging to the quality of your life. And whilst you remain stuck within the cycle of a negative feedback loop within any one area of your life, then this limitation prevents you from making positive progress. So what exactly is a negative feedback loop? Well, together in this presentation, we will explore the definition of a negative feedback loop. We will explore the different types of negative feedback loop, and we would explore the various ways in how a negative feedback loop can have a detrimental effect over our life, and we will explore how they form and develop. Well, the aim of this presentation is to investigate the problem, bring forth the solution, and provide you with a proven strategy to identify negative feedback loops in your life and break their patterns so that you can start to develop positive feedback loops that get you the lifestyle results that you truly desire. So if you are keen to explore this subject with me, learn everything that you need to know about making and breaking a negative feedback loop so that you can experience both personal growth and lifestyle development, then stick around and buckle up for the long haul, because I will be going deep and expanding wide on this subject. Also included in this presentation is a downloadable mind game strategy book, example templates, and printable worksheets for you to implement the strategy. So let's first begin this presentation by exploring the definition of a negative feedback loop, which is to understand the term and the psychological process of a negative feedback loop. And we will start with breaking down the term and define each word in the context of psychology. So beginning with the word negative. By negative, we mean that we have a pessimistic attitude, a defeatist outlook, and fatalistic perspective towards something. With the word feedback, this means that we are feeding negative energy into something, and that negative energy is returning back. There is a feedback. And with the word loop, we mean that the negative feedback has formed a circuit. There is an action-reaction sequence of negativity that repeats in a loop. In other words, with a negative feedback loop, we have formed a negative association to a situation in our life that is recycling over and over again, where we keep having the same negative experience in relation to that situation. And as you are soon to discover, we have formed negative feedback loops in different situations and aspects of our life. And these different negative feedback loops, they can recycle over a day, where over the course of a day we can experience the same negative situation once, twice, or even more. And those daily cycles can then repeat over the course of a week, whereby, for example, we can do the same thing on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and where those weekly cycles can then develop into monthly and yearly cycles, whereby we have developed cycles within cycles. And as you can imagine, when we get stuck within the cycles of these detrimental negative feedback loops, over time they can really damage the quality of our life, prematurely demoralizing and degrading who we be and what we do. And most of us are completely unaware that we are caught within these harmful negative feedback loops. So it's really important for you to establish where you have formed these negative feedback loops in your life so that you can break through their degrading effects and start transcending your life on an upward cycle of positive results. And for that, you need to know what are the key elements that form the process of a negative feedback loop. So here is a simple illustration that shows you the model of a negative feedback loop with its 4 key elements, the 4 steps that make the process of its cycle. Now, before I explain those 4 steps of the model, you need to know that a negative feedback loop can be triggered by internal and external stimulus. We can have a negative experience that is triggered by the internal stimulus of memories, thoughts, and emotions. We can have a negative event take place that is triggered by the external stimulus of a person, situation, or environment. And there is a feedback loop between the internal and external stimulus, whereby, for example, a negative person can trigger a negative emotion within you. But ultimately, the experience of a negative event is always taking place inside your mind and body. Now, the first thing that I want you to notice about this negative feedback loop model is that the cycle is anti-clockwise. The arrows are pointing anti-clockwise, and that's because the flow of negative energy is anti-life. Negative energy is debilitating, destructive, and diminishing to the life force being your mind, soul, and body. Now, within this model of a negative feedback loop, you will see the 4 key elements. Number 1, you have the negative events. Number 2, you have the negative experience. Number 3, you have the positive compensation. And number 4, you have the behavior reinforcement. So that's pretty straightforward. And now I will break down what is actually happening during the process of each element. And I begin with the first step of the negative feedback loop process, where we have been triggered by the external stimulus of a negative event. So what exactly is the negative event? Well, we have been confronted by a negative person. We have participated in a negative situation, or we find ourselves in a negative environment. Negative in that we are having to deal with a problem, a difficulty, an obstacle, a grievance of some sorts. And again, that's pretty straightforward. We all understand that. We've all encountered negative events in our life. And with a negative feedback loop, we are referring to a negative event that keeps repeating. Now let's look at the second step of the negative feedback loop process, where a negative event has taken place which has caused a negative experience within, which means that the negative event was the action and our negative experience of that event was the reaction. We have reacted to the event in a negative way. You have thought, felt, spoken, or acted in a negative way. And what you need to know is that a negative reaction is often a conditioned response. You are conditioned to respond a certain way to specific stimulus. And that conditioned response stems from a memory. Through the automation of memory, you have responded negatively. As a result of that negative experience, you can also engage with an act of self-abuse or self-sabotage, whereby you do something that causes harm and loss. And then we move on to the third step of the negative feedback loop process. Step 3 is where the negative experience is shortly followed by a positive compensation. And that's because nobody escapes the universal laws of polarity and balance. Everything about this reality, this life, and human behavior is subject to the laws of polarity and balance, where energy will shift from one extremity or pole to the other. And just like a pendulum, the energy swings one way and then swings back the other. And the examples of that would be, what goes up must come down. Pain is always followed with pleasure. Negativity will rebound to positivity. I think you get the picture. Therefore, after a negative experience, we often rebound into a positive compensation. For example, when most people experience some type of harm and loss caused by another, they tend to give back as good as they get, and they seek revenge to get even. Whenever people feel entrapped, overwhelmed, and unable to deal with a negative situation, they look for a means of escapism to get some distance and relief from the situation. We also try to escape from the discomfort of negative thoughts and emotions, and we do this by soothing ourselves with an uplifting pleasure or comforting reward. So that would be like eating comfort food, getting stimulated or soothed with alcohol, illicit or prescriptive drugs, shopping, or being entertained with digital stimulus like gaming, gambling, social media, music, and TV shows. Also, directly after negative experiences, we tend to seek sympathy and support from others in which to offload our upsets and concerns, to feel heard and to know that someone cares. And all of these different positive compensations, they make us feel good. We get to indulge in activities that we like, that boosts the way we feel and alleviates that negative energy. Which leads me on to the fourth step and element of a negative feedback loop process, and that would be the behavior reinforcement. The reason that a negative feedback loop cycle repeats is because each element of the entire process is reinforced. The way that we reinforce behavior is through rationalization and justification of the event, the experience, and the positive compensation, which means that you could find reasons to think that the negative event is a normal and acceptable part of life, even when the negative event is abnormal and unacceptable. You can also find reasons to affirm that you were right to behave negatively, even though you may have behaved wrong, unfairly, and inappropriate. You can also start to believe that the negative situation is irreversible, unchangeable, or that you are destined to experience misfortune and hard times. You can convince yourself that you are not at fault nor responsible, and that you are powerless to change the event or your behavior, even though you could if you tried until you were successful. You can also deny that the experience took place and distract yourself from dealing with the negative thoughts and emotions, rather than reflect upon the experience and process what happened and then think of alternative ways to deal with the situation in the future. You instead try to just forget all about it. And of course, life then gets in the way and sweeps you off to the next moment, the next event, the next problem. And perhaps the most reinforcing part of the negative feedback loop process is that you have gained a positive compensation during or shortly after the negative experience, whereby you have learned to associate and link a positive outcome and result directly after the negative experience, whereby the positive compensation has evened out, lessened, or neutralized the negative experience. And when we don't address and then resolve the negative event itself, the next time that it occurs in the future, we are going to repeat the same process that has been reinforced. And with each recycle of the process, the negative feedback loop becomes more and more reinforced. The process of the cycle is deeply embedded into the psychoneurological fabric of the mind and body until the negative feedback loop becomes unconscious and instinctive, in that we automatically and reactively respond to similar events in the future the same way. And now that we have both explored how a negative feedback loop is triggered by external stimulus, let's take a look at the model of how a negative feedback loop is triggered by internal stimulus. So in this case, the negative feedback loop begins with the first step of a negative experience. You first experience a negative memory, thoughts, or emotion. And to be clear here, you have not been influenced by anything or anyone out there. You have just recalled a bad experience from the past, or you just think or feel bad for no other reason than you just do. And it could be that you are alone when this happens, or it could be that you are with people. And yet that negative experience is not a reaction to what someone said or what you see. It was not provoked by something out there. And then, because you feel negative within, you would speak and act in a way that affirms negativity, which means that you can have a bad attitude, you can talk things down, you can sneer about things, you can lope around. There's all sorts of ways that we speak and act negatively. You could also engage with an act of self-abuse and self-sabotage, which again means to do something that causes you harm, loss, or injury. Or you wouldn't do something that prevents you from having a positive experience that could potentially be a rewarding experience for you. And as a result of your negative experience within, you then enter the second step of the feedback process, which is to engage with a negative event, where you can start to antagonize a negative reaction from someone. You can displace that negative energy from within by causing drama in a relationship, doing something that upsets someone and causes conflict, because you are feeling unhappy, pissed off, and unwilling to tolerate certain behaviors. And you may even accuse and attack people as the reason why you are feeling bad. And you do this because you have looked at the situation from a negative perception. As within, so without, you are projecting negativity onto people and into the situations and environments that you encounter. You feel that certain factors are against you, unfair, upsetting, and without good reason, which then leads you on to the third step of the negative feedback loop, which is to get relief from and counterbalance the negative experience and event that took place. You seek some type of positive compensation. It could be that you have got revenge over what someone said and even the score, which makes you feel righteous and like justice has been served. Where perhaps you have won the outcome of an argument or situation. You can also manage to escape the event and then find yourself enjoying some compensatory reward of a feel-good pleasure. Maybe you seek counsel from others that are on your side that offer sympathy and support and affirm that you did nothing wrong, that you are in the right. And all of these positive compensations, they make us feel good. We get to indulge in the activities that we like, we get to alleviate from the negativity and boost the way we feel. Which leads me onto the fourth step of the negative feedback loop process, and that would be the behavior reinforcement. And just like the previous model where we looked at the external stimulus, we can reinforce behavior through rationalization and justification of the event, the experience, and the positive compensation. And because we have not addressed and resolved the negative experience within, the next time that it occurs in the future, we're going to repeat the same process that has been reinforced. So now that you are aware of the model and process of a negative feedback loop, now you know about how a negative feedback loop can be triggered by internal and external stimulus. You can now apply this model to any reoccurring problematic situation in your life that results in a negative consequence to establish the four-step process of its negative feedback loop and understand how that personal experience of yours takes place and is reinforced to become this negative trait, this habitual behavior pattern. And to assist you with this, I'm going to share with you some examples of negative feedback loops that can take place in different areas of our lives. So together, let's now explore some different types of negative feedback loops. Right now, I'm going to explore 4 different types that correlate with important aspects of life. These examples that I share with you are not exhaustive or conclusive because there are so many ways in which we experience negativity. However, these examples will give you some framework and reference to show you how negative feedback loops can develop in the different areas of your life that are harming and limiting the quality of your life. And those 4 types of negative feedback loops that we are going to explore right here, right now, are relational negative feedback loops, physical, purpose, and financial negative feedback loops. So let's begin with an example of a relational negative feedback loop. We can easily form negative associations and attachments within the relationships that we have or towards relationships that we do not have. Where in both scenarios we get trapped within the cycle of a negative feedback loop that carries on with an unresolved issue that prevents a positive outcome and progress in this area of our life. And for this, I will explore 2 examples of a relational negative feedback loop, examples that have both internal and external triggers. So here is the first example, and it begins with the external trigger of a negative event. And in this scenario, a negative event has taken place where you would like to meet someone that you are attracted to. This could be a romantic or platonic attraction. It could be with someone that you have seen before, perhaps someone that works at the same place as you or visits the same venue as you, or it could be someone you have seen for the first time. And the negative event that takes place is that you desire to meet this person, and yet the moment passes you by. You miss the opportunity where you could have approached them, but you've got cold feet. You choked at the pivotal moment. You faltered because during that event, you had a negative experience. You were feeling too insecure and nervous and worried that you might say something stupid, that you might not know what to say to the person, and that you would make a mistake. You could have feared that the person would have thought that you were perhaps unattractive, boring, crazy, or approaching them at a bad time, or they would have rejected, dismissed, and embarrassed you. During that moment of imagining the worst case scenario, which elicited a sense of dread and embarrassment, you paused, you hesitated, you avoided the prospect of approaching this person, and then the moment passed you by. And then post-event, you began to kick yourself for not approaching the person. You began to feel like a coward. You started to regret the fact that you did not seize the moment. You perhaps started to question, what's wrong with me? And then doubted yourself. All of which are very unpleasant experiences that knock the confidence and where we start to devalue who we are. Then we move on to the third step of this negative feedback loop example, where you would gain a positive compensation after the negative experience. And what would be a positive compensation in this scenario? Well, by not approaching this person, you did not have to face your fears. You didn't have to face the truth of what might have happened. And therefore, the fear and anxiety of that fear, it subsided and you felt relieved. And of course, had you approached this person, you may have got caught up within a lengthy conversation, and that would have interfered in what you were doing in that moment, and perhaps that may have messed up your schedule for that day. So it's positive that you get to stay focused with what you were doing and you stay on track with your day. Now, if you are single and this person was someone that you were attracted to romantically, by not meeting them, you get to remain single. Because of course, being single has positive benefits. You don't have to think about someone else. You don't have to answer to or be responsible for someone else. You don't have to do what someone else wants to do. You're free and single. And even if you do feel lonely because you are single, what better way to wash away that horrible feeling of loneliness with a bottle or two of wine with your girlfriends, or a couple of beers down the local with your buddy? Which then leads us on to the fourth step of this relational negative feedback loop, which is that you convince yourself that the timing's never right to meet someone new, that you are too busy with other things, that you just haven't got the time. If you are single, it could be that you tell yourself that it wasn't meant to be because the person wasn't the one. Because if he or she was the one, then something would have happened naturally on its own course. And it doesn't matter anyway, because there will always be another opportunity to approach someone else. There are plenty of other fish left in the sea. And yet, because of these reasons and excuses of why you can't meet someone and why you didn't meet someone, along with the positive compensations, the cycle of the negative feedback loop remains intact, which results in you never meeting that special or important someone that you would like to meet. Now let's look at the second example of a relational negative feedback loop with an internal trigger. This example of a relational negative feedback loop is connected with an ongoing dispute with a partner a loved one. In this example, the cycle of a negative feedback loop is triggered by the internal stimulus of a negative experience. That negative experience is that you simply wake up in a foul mood, feel tired, or a little grumpy, and so you don't feel in the mood for conversation. Then you experience the negative events where your partner reminds you about that task that you never do. You know, the one that they keep going on about, keep nagging and pestering you to do. That task that you keep saying you'll get it done and that you'll promise it will be done today, but you never get it done. And in your foul mood, you have decided that your partner is winding you up, that they are pissing you off on purpose. You get the sense that they know that this one thing really winds you up, and that's why they always do it. And because you already feel low and irritable, what they say is like prodding a sleepy bear with a huge stick. And so you react. You retaliate back with an outburst of anger and spite, which then leads to a slanging match with you and your partner between who's right and who's wrong. Of course, arguments get heated in the moment. Tempers flare. And this only but aggravates the way you feel, making you feel worse. And during this fiery exchange, you get the last word in and you stand defiant that you are right. And so you feel like you've won the tussle. Then you slam the door and storm off in whatever direction that you have planned for that day. And that's a positive thing because you've got the upper hand and you don't have to do that task that you've been avoiding. And because you are feeling upset, you decide to stop at your local fast food joint and get that nice and delicious food, that little pleasurable treat that always makes you feel better. Later that same day, you then meet up with a friend and share the event. And of course, your friend has the same problem at home with their partner, who won't do that task, which then leads to an argument. And during that meetup, you and your friend, you both agree that you are both right to act the way that you did and that your partners are in the wrong. Case closed. Then on your way home that same day, you start to think of a clever response should your partner mention or moan at you again about that task. And when you get home, you pretend like that negative event never happened. You conceal your negative thoughts and emotions and act unbothered because you don't want to lose face and because it's better to keep quiet than risk stoking up that fire again. Besides, you can't let this little one thing get in the way of your whole relationship. So to keep the peace, you go along to get along, to keep things moving forward so that you can focus on and deal with the more pressing issues like the kids, the bills, and the other bigger problems that have taken place that day. You sweep the whole morning incident under the carpet. And thus, this negative feedback loop of this particular situation that occurred in the morning, it remains unresolved and ready to be triggered the next time round. And I'm hedging my bets here when I say that you can relate to both of those relational negative feedback loops that we have just explored. Hello there again. I just wanted to say thanks for taking the time to view a part of this presentation. If you are interested and curious to learn more, if you want to get access to the full presentation along with the solution, the strategy, the book and the worksheets, if you want to cultivate mental and lifestyle wealth, if you want to start playing the right mind games to get the best results, then you might want to consider becoming an exclusive member of the Mind Games program and Wealth Creation Group. If so, just click the link below this video and let's begin that journey together.